Good evening, YouTube family. So glad to be back after not posting videos for about 2 weeks. I went to South Africa. I was invited by my former pastor, Father Ed Handley. Thank you very much for the invitation to attend the Desmond Tutu Travel Seminar of 2022. And what a seminar it was. It was my first time on the African continent. And you know, I wear this necklace very proudly, being taught about Pan Africanism. And I was in this part of Africa, southern part, and I was in Cape Town. We flew to Johannesburg. The flight was delayed. It was a blessing why it got delayed, and then I realized the blessing in the delay because I got a phone call just before I boarded the plane that I needed to hear. But I want to encourage everybody to make sure you buy this book, you read this book, Desmond Tutu, A Spiritual Biography of South Africa's Confessor, by none other than the amazing scholar who organized this awesome travel seminar, Michael Battle. What a service he's done in educating people like myself about Desmond Tutu, about his life, about his circle. Thank you, Edwin Arison of Hermanus, South Africa, for leading, working with Michael Battle on producing an amazing travel seminar from August 17th to the 24th that I was grateful to be part of. So many things that I shared. It's on my website, drronefraser.com. Check it out. It's free. I encourage you to study the life of Desmond Tutu because what he did through the Anglican Church was really transform a nation and show to the world how Europeans and Africans are capable of living harmoniously together. And that's to say nothing about the necessity of the Haitian and Cuban revolutions, but that life that he lived was a very intentional life. And I'm grateful for Edwin Arison and for Michael Battle for organizing an amazing travel seminar 2022. And thank you, Father Ed Henley, for thinking of me to join that seminar. Certain few things I want to share with what I picked up there. And here we are. We visited the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation. This was in downtown center, what they call City Center in Cape Town. And they had a beautiful, what we would call a museum-like feel to giving you a biography of the life of Desmond Tutu. The vision of the foundation, and I highly support viewers of this YouTube live, my 14th YouTube live, to support the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation. Their vision is to activate the courage to heal for societal transformation. And their mission is to contribute towards the nurturing of moral leadership, to facilitate the dialogue and debate of reconciliation, to support programs and events like this seminar, which are underscored by the values of Desmond and Leah Tutu, where faith comes first, where there is no racism, there are no people acting on racism, at least they're relating to each other, human being to human being. And their mission states to make use of the rich archival heritage, which they've already done when you visit their headquarters. The values of the foundation is to use their voice to spread the messages, use our voice, those who support and those who are part of the foundation, Edwin Arison and Michael Battle, use our voice to spread messages of hope through our values of Ubuntu, respect, integrity, compassion, forgiveness, and reconciliation. And the exhibit they show of Desmond Tutu's life shows exactly those values. What struck out to me, I took a few photos. These are Desmond Tutu's notes on the passing of Steve Biko, who was brutalized inside prison, and just the time he took to really understand what Biko's life meant to the anti-apartheid struggle. In what he hand wrote there, which I was able to make a lot out of, it was the foundation. His death would not be in vain. And it was because of his death that there would be the fight to free Nelson Mandela and the fight to have Nelson Mandela have the opportunity to become president of the nation of South Africa. So these are some of the parts of the exhibit that struck me. Another part is a quote from Desmond Tutu saying that the Bible guides those to fight unjust laws. And that made me immediately think of Martin Luther King in his Why We Can't Wait speech where he talked to the Alabama clergyman about the reality of an unjust law. And Desmond Tutu makes that same argument in this exhibit. Also, what struck me was this Washington Post headline, which was when I was a teenager, but I found it interesting that I was a DC resident reading a newspaper from my home city in South Africa. That was part of this exhibit. And this was when Mandela was elected president, and they have him, Nelson Mandela, and they have Archbishop Desmond Tutu with the fists in the air. And that's a headline in the Washington Post, which is definitely a triumph, definitely. If you read my review of Michael Battle's incredible book, you'll also see how there were some concessions that Tutu had to make. But this was absolutely a triumph for the world, for the nation, to see Mandela as president. This was part of that exhibit. By the way, please support my Cash App, Rome Fraser, if you're watching this, $ Rome Fraser. And please subscribe, like, and share my YouTube. Share with those you know. I talk about films, I talk about books, I talk about plays, I talk about travel, I talk about a lot of culture on my live YouTube. So I absolutely appreciate your support. This is also my first time, September 4th, 2022, going live on my LinkedIn. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm grateful for the opportunity to come back and share what I learned. You can also read in detail, you know, the whole owl story. I tell the story of the owl that visited me when my granddad died, and 6 months to the day after he died. And then the owl came back to me in South Africa. So I write about that in my blog. If you go to my website, drromefraser.com. We also had the chance to visit in South Africa, Robben Island. There's a Robben Island museum. And my former pastor, Father Ed, was brave enough to ask the tour guide, who was a former prisoner like Nelson Mandela. I don't know if he was there at the same time as Nelson Mandela, but my pastor asked him, the guard, whether he thought he would be leading tours of the prison that he was in, and only Father Ed could ask that. So I'm glad he asked that, and of course, the tour guide laughed, a raucous laughter, getting that question, and it just reminded me of the authenticity of the South African people and how the Xhosa culture. And I met Amachle, and I visited Zwelihle, and I met all these people, and I understood the Dutch, and I got the Dutch history I got the English history, and I got the history of the Afrikaner. I got the history of the Sharpeville massacre, when the students who protested learning Afrikaners in schools were gunned down by the South African police, and how that was a memorializing moment. And we stopped by the stopped by the home of a drummer and drummed, who lived in I forgot the name of the place he lived in. I will put the name in the comment if you ask me the name, but I worked with local artists, and it was overwhelming. I didn't even put down everything, but I did start email correspondences with those people that really touched me in South Africa, because I didn't want to go and be an automaton getting all this information and then just going back home, never having changed myself, never consciously being more conscious, being more aware of who I am. I wanted to make sure that I downloaded all the information I got there, because it was a lot. And I saw the similarity between the style of worship among the Xhosa people and the similarities between that and my mother's worship in Jamaica in the early in the 1940s in Mitchelltown, Jamaica. I heard the similar sound that those women made when they prayed, or the men made when they spoke in the church, and I heard those similar sounds in that church in Zwelihle in Cape Town, South Africa. What an amazing experience. This is another photo of probably the most powerful church I've ever gone to, this was the Anglican Church in Zwelihle. The liturgy is in Xhosa. And I was the first time I saw that, and the whole service was in Xhosa. And that's what made me like, wow, okay, this is how we do not lose our culture, even though the translation from English to Xhosa will cause things in Xhosa to be lost. But still, the power of the meaning, the communication with God, the communication with the spiritual, the communication with the divine was all up in that church. And people on my Instagram thought that this was my godmother service. No, I just mentioned my godmother because this is an Anglican church service, and she was born in Grenada, my godmother. She passed, I found out the day I gave my sermon, because I gave a sermon um, at the church Desmond Tutu attended, which was St. Peter's Church in Hermanas, where Father Jerry was a gracious host and guided me the whole way. I was very nervous, like, oh my gosh, what do I say in um, honor of the life of Desmond Tutu? What do I say? But I think I preached it well, and there's a recording I can share of the homily, the small sermon I gave in the church that Desmond Tutu attended. So that was amazing. This is not that church. This is a different church. Hermanus is a more formal city, metropolitan, I can guess you could say. Zuelichle is in what is called a shanty town, and it reminded me so much of Kingston. It reminded me so much of Jamaica, where I went, and it was a powerful experience. I have so much more to say on that. I can't like take up all my time to talk about it, but I might just come back because I want to make sure I do these lives within 30 minutes, not more than 30 minutes. So I'm grateful for my time in South Africa. Again, subscribe, like, and share my YouTube. If you're watching live now, I put this on my Twitter and I put this on my Facebook. So if you're watching, please comment, please like, please share. Subscribe to my YouTube, Roan Fraser. I haven't posted in about 2 weeks because last week I was in South Africa with the Episcopal Church and part of the Tutu Travel Seminar. Again, if you haven't gotten, check out my book review on my website. It's the post exactly before the one called My Trip to South Africa. I reviewed this amazing book, Desmond Tutu, by Michael Battle, who organized the amazing Tutu Travel Seminar that I was part of this year. And they're organizing another one if you're interested in January. In January. So hit me up for details. The support is tremendous. It's important to support the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation. They do awesome work, and it's definitely work that our public officials in this side of the Atlantic could learn from. The ways in which politics and religious belief don't have to be separated, they don't have to be. And Desmond Tutu's life demonstrated that. You can't separate spirituality or spiritual beliefs from two different cultures reconciling. You have to include that. In fact, we need to find common ground through those spiritual beliefs, whether you're Christian, whether you're Muslim. A lot of the strife and the discourse and the divides and the political arguments and the political divides in this country can be addressed by what Desmond Tutu did. Another huge aspect that was part of that foundation platform was they had the books of the Truth and Reconciliation proceedings. They had all the books about that. And Michael Battle wrote about, the elected officials that were held to account, as well as Desmond Tutu himself, as well as those who were negatively affected, who lost family members because of police brutality, because of apartheid. And you see firsthand the results of that work in books they have called the Truth and Reconciliation Report. What the exhibit at this foundation makes crystal clear is that the Truth and Reconciliation Committee did not do enough. And apartheid basically is still, it's not gone away completely. It did not dismantle, it did not eradicate. And that's an important conclusion to make because it just shows how still it takes human will, it takes political will to eliminate what the Truth and Reconciliation Committee was trying to eliminate, which was, the apartheid. Definitely the election of Nelson Mandela as a president of South Africa was a big step to dismantling apartheid. But what was clear in my mind is that apartheid was nowhere near from being invisible or having gone away. Just like in the United States, racism in apartheid, racism in the United States is still a thing. It takes individual people, it takes human will, it takes a concerted effort to say, we're not going to continue these policies of exclusion based on a person's perceived race. And the whole experience of the Tutu Travel Seminar was to show you these principles, these aspects that Desmond Tutu absolutely put into practice, that he absolutely put into practice. Since returning, so much has changed. I mean, well, it was a lot of dramatic stuff that was going on. I left on the 15th of August and returned about the 25th because the travel took 2 days by plane to the United States. But since I came back, I was very, let me see, can I zoom in on this? Since returning, I saw some really awesome interviews, and this was one of them. Vlad TV, DJ Vlad interviewed Tavis Smiley and asked him questions that I was hoping other people would ask him before DJ Vlad asked him, and that is about, the case of um, sexual assault that came against Tavis Smiley. And he made clear in this interview, what I thought was most important about this interview was his admitting to PBS trying to settle out of court. And whenever big company and offering him millions to basically settle. When I heard that, I was like, that means PBS has something to hide, that a court of law would not find Smiley guilty for what he was accused of. And so that probed my interest. So shout out to DJ Vlad. I know DJ Vlad has taken a lot of hits from Tariq Nasheed, saying that he didn't need him. Nasheed didn't need Vlad. I get that, and Kwame Brown. But I think despite that, DJ Vlad asked the question to a big figure that influenced me. See, that's what I didn't admit. Tavis Smiley was a big role model for me, like Oprah was a role model for me. When I started college, I went to Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, which I just visited on the 27th of August when my college classmate, Calvin, who I mentioned in my previous YouTube live, passed. His service was on Friday the 26th. And I passed through Yale and I, remember how it was to be a student there. And one of the encouraging things while I was a student there was listening to WYBC, 94.3 FM, WYBC. And every morning, the Tom Joyner morning show would be on. And who would give news is Tavis Smiley. So I would hear him like every morning when I was in college. And just hearing his voice and just hearing his interpretation of news made me be more serious in my own personal interpretation. And then he had an NPR show from 2001 to 2004, and George Duke produced the theme to that song, which I fell in love with. I liked the theme song as much as I liked the content. Tavis Smiley interviewed Toni Morrison. Tavis Smiley interviewed Prince. I'll never forget the NPR show. Tavis did a special on the 25th anniversary of Roots, the TV series, and he interviewed all the stars from Roots. He was definitely a cultural icon for me. And then I interviewed Tavis in 2004, just before he started his PBS show. And then he had that PBS show that interviewed Bill Cosby at least twice, Prince several times. He had countless guests on his show. And I remember reading his book, What I Know for Sure. And he talked about a lot of things that DJ Vlad wisely, amazingly, brilliantly did his homework on. It was a pleasure to hear DJ Vlad drop serious knowledge about Tavis Smiley's life and the triumphs Tavis Smiley came through. So I was grateful to hear that. And it made me almost feel like I was deceived when I heard the part where Tavis Smith said that PBS offered him millions of dollars to settle out of court because if the court proceeded as it was, he would be found not guilty. That's usually the only reason why big companies want to offer so much money to settle out of court. So shout out to DJ Vlad for interviewing Tavis Smiley and really clearing his name. I was thinking about the points in my book, um, my latest book about Toni Morrison's last novel, that mentions Zora Neale Hurston's unpublished novel called Herod the Great. And my mentor, Deborah Plant, wrote that Zora Neale Hurston wrote that book. Um, that book for Hurston was about the restoration of a good name, which was very personal for Hurston at that time. She was writing that novel because she was facing charges against her, charges that she molested a young boy, and those charges were dropped because they were found to be unfounded. So I had a special place in my heart for that. I played that part over, and that's why I think people should really listen to this interview to understand whether what we were told about Tavis Smiley is in fact true. Because according to the interview, he was absolutely not guilty of what he was accused of. So the whole point of Toni Morrison's last novel is to encourage parents to really sit down with their children, question the headlines they hear in the mainstream news, because sometimes those are absolutely unfounded. Also, the day I returned to the States from South Africa, my mom called me to tell me that my godmother, who helped my mom birth me, October 12th, 1979, at Brookdale Hospital on Rockaway Parkway in Brooklyn, passed. She passed in the Mayo Clinic from cancer. Powerful role model for me, very encouraging. I told her about my new book, about the work of Toni Martin, who writes about Marcus Garvey, and I mentioned to her I'll be dealing with how Martin wrote the Grenadian Revolution. And she said, well, I was a good friend of Jacqueline Kreft, who worked with Maurice Bishop, who, like Jacqueline Kreft, who was assassinated in October of 1983, when I was 4 years old, when after the U.S. invaded Grenada in that year. And so she was just so encouraging of everything I did. I remember when I graduated college in 2001, she invited me to her home, then home in Bordeaux in France. And she's just been a light in my life, a light from birth, finishing college, and a light to motivate me as an author, see myself as a writer. She always encouraged me to see myself as a writer and to raise the debates that need to be raised that nobody's talking about. So thank you, Aunt Laura. I love you and I miss you. And I will see you again. And then finally, the day after, while I was in South Africa, who also passed was Esther Cooper Jackson, who I interviewed for my doctoral dissertation on the leap year day in February, which is February 29, 2012. I interviewed her in her Brooklyn apartment. She had since been moved to a nursing home closer to her family in Massachusetts. I interviewed her about being an editor for an amazing periodical called Freedom Ways, which my dear friend oh, Joseph K. gave me the book This Child's Gonna Live by Sarah Wright. And Joseph K. had all the issues of Freedom Ways that ever were printed. And now NYU Library has just put is it NYU? No, it's on Google. I'm confusing Freedom for Freedom Ways. Yeah, Freedom Ways periodical is now all online, so you could see every issue that Esther Cooper Jackson edited. They're all digitized. And she is an important editor. She's an important activist. She's an important thinker. When I visited her home in 2012, she gave me this pamphlet called This Is My Husband. Her husband, James Jackson, was railroaded by the government under what was then in the late 50s, the Smith Act. And she wrote this pamphlet before she edited Freedom Ways periodical called This Is My Husband, where she talked about why it was unfair for him to be a political prisoner under the Smith Act. which basically imprisoned you in this country if it was deemed that you were inciting a revolution or if you were deemed too communist. So she wrote this pamphlet in support of her husband. If you want to read more about Esther Cooper Jackson, while I was at her home, she gave me this book, The View from Here, which is a collection of articles her husband, James E. Jackson, who passed in the 90s, wrote when he was editor of the periodical The Daily Worker. This was in the 50s. And the Daily Worker is significant because it was really the first periodical. It was seen as a left periodical, communist periodical, that understood the necessity of the Cuban Revolution, why the revolution happened and why it is important for American citizens to support it, because they were going against those in Cuba who fought with Castro to expel those who supported Batista, were fighting for a new social order. And so the social order they were fighting, James Jackson writes, is the same one that persecutes him in the Smith Act. So he was a powerful writer, and his wife was a powerful writer and editor of Freedom Ways periodical. There's the academic biography that I did write a review of by Sarah Razudik Haviland. In fact, when I was in her home, Esther Cooper Jackson mentioned her name, and she told me there's going to be a book written about us, and this is the book. It's called James and Esther Cooper Jackson, Love and Courage in the Black Freedom Movement. It was an interesting book. However, at the end of the book, the tone kind of becomes fatalistic. The way that Haviland writes it, she almost suggests, the suggestion is made in her writing, that it is futile to follow the path of a Esther Cooper Jackson, because in the end she ended up having no money. And I was just like, I mean, she didn't say it outright, but I'm feeling emotionally what she's saying. And yeah, the best way to understand her and her husband is to read words from directly themselves. And so for James E. Jackson, it's The View from Here. And for Esther Cooper Jackson, you can read This Is My Husband. It gives you an idea about how life was in the 50s. The Smith Act, because not only did the Smith Act persecute James E. Jackson, it persecuted Claudia Jones, and it persecuted many other individuals, Louis Burnham. They had to all go underground. And Hazel Scott, the amazing Gemini Trinidadian artist, pianist, who had her own show. So when you read Esther Cooper Jackson, you have a greater appreciation for what we are able to partake of today, including the opportunity that I had to go to South Africa. So check out my website for more details on my trip to South Africa. Support the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation. Don't hesitate to support that. Don't hesitate to support my Cash App. If you learned something from this YouTube, I definitely appreciate your support. My Cash App is $Rone Fraser. I'm coming out with a new book by next year with Arawak Publishers about Tony Martin, the work of Tony Martin, which includes, as my Aunt Laurel mentioned, Jacqueline Kreft and Maurice Bishop, and why we need to know their names. We shouldn't forget their legacies. Please subscribe, like, and share my YouTube. Thank you for joining me. God bless you. Stay tuned for my next YouTube. Keep reading.